Hi everyone. This is Pawan Kumar, founder of 3PM Ventures. Invite you all for the Founder World 2021 event, which is co-hosted by SV. Today we have Minette, president of Kickstart Ventures, backed by Globe Telecom. And today we are going to have a lively discussion about Philippines ecosystem, community's background, and a bit about how does Philippines ecosystem fits into the global startup ecosystem. So let's start with the introduction of maybe it take a while just to tell us a bit about yourself.
Gosh, happily. And Hi, everyone. My name is Minette Navarrete. I lead Kickstart Ventures, a corporate venture capital firm that invests globally in early growth stage tech startups. We are based in the Philippines, but we do have investments. In fact, I think most of our capital has been deployed overseas, whether in the United States or in Canada, Israel, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia. Um, we manage three funds. Two of them are funded entirely by Globe Telecom, the leading mobile operator in the Philippines. And our third fund, the Active Fund, which we launched just last year, 2020, is the largest venture capital fund to come out of the country, with about 180 million US dollars in capital. So we manage about a quarter of a billion US dollars for our LPs. It's an exciting time, Pavan, to be in Southeast Asia, and the Philippines has hit a few interesting milestones this year. So excited to be with you in Founders World and to see what we can share and learn.
Great Minette. I mean, great background. Before we really dive the rest of the our discussion, what really brought you to the startup space? What's like you have a solid educational background, then you went to the private sector. Now you are in the startup space. So a bit about your own journey to the startup ecosystem.
Gosh, it's a great way to start the conversation, Pavan. I think somebody just recently said this to me. We looked at your history, and clearly you are not risk averse. And I think maybe that's one way to look at it. But I think the other way really is I'm interested in things that are new. Um, and while innovation is kind of the fancy word that everybody will use and it sounds much more professional, I think the personal thing is I really want to do things that have not been done by someone else. That can't be done by someone else. So I'm far less interested in kind of the regular thing. Um, if I have a son who plays Dungeons and Dragons, and I have learned that the language for me is chaotic good. So I like things that are new, that solve real problems in the real world. Um, and while I could do and I can do quite a lot of that in the corporate setup where I've always been, I find that working with startups and particularly making investments across a range, across a whole portfolio of early stage tech startups is what really gets me excited and energized. So here I am.
So being a woman, was it easy?
Um, to be honest, in the beginning, it wasn't something I particularly noticed. Um, I think at some point I did start to notice that there is an automatic assumption that the guys are going to be more tech than the girls. I think part of that culturally in Asia, um, you might be in a supporting role rather than in a leading role. But I have to say the Philippines is quite an interesting market, meaning that rather unusually, women play a senior role in terms of management boards, in terms of leadership roles. Globe Telecom, the company I belong to, has actually a senior team that is 50% male, 50% female.
That's true.
And even when I look across my peers in the Philippines, across other investment firms, there are an equal number, I think, of women who have a deciding role in investments, you know, alongside the men. So the Philippines is probably not your typical market,
Right.
and therefore that's been made easy.
Minute, you know, Southeast Asia is growing pretty fast in the startup ecosystem. We keep hearing about a lot of unicorns coming out of India, coming out of Singapore, and uh, Hong Kong obviously continues to be a major hub. I mean, we, we tend to hear less about Philippines, but if you could throw some light on what the startup ecosystem really looks like, which sectors are growing, which sectors are getting a lot of attention, where the funding goes, that would be really useful.
Now that's a good point to make, Pavan. I think for many years the Philippine startup ecosystem has lagged behind its neighbors in Southeast Asia. When you think Southeast Asia, generally you think about Singapore because that's where such a lot of the investing activity happens. You think about Indonesia, the largest market, and it's got, I think, more than half a dozen unicorns at the moment. Malaysia, because one of the biggest unicorns in Southeast Asia, Grab, um, is from there and has just grown across the region. So you don't hear a lot about the Philippines, partly because we have not had many large exits. We've not had a very big startup, so very high valuations. Um, and some of that has been, I think, because we're very much trained to be employees, to not be entrepreneurs. There's active dissuasion. I think that's changing. And certainly when I think about last year and this year, so for example, the average, the median fund size in Southeast Asia is about $100 million. And um, in the past, the Philippines has always lagged behind that median fund size, and therefore the capital availability hasn't been as much. Last year, Kickstart announced our third fund, the active fund, with a fresh $180 million. So that's last year was the first time that the Philippine median actually exceeded the regional median. And that comes from a single firm, which tells you not many investment firms as well. So, but we are hoping that with, sort of serious commitments like that, that other investment houses, that other corporates will be emboldened to make a similar commitment and that we can make more capital available um, in the Philippines and in Southeast Asia broadly.
Are there any specific sectors where
Mm.
most of the focus goes, or how do you see, like, is it across the sectors or certain, like, fintech, edutech, are these the promising sectors, or or do we tend to see a lot of movement across?
No, you're right. I think fintech receives a disproportionate amount of interest, of investment, and we see that all across the region. Certainly in the Philippines, fintech firms are the ones that have grown very large, and I think certainly because of our emerging market profile, it means that there are not many bank accounts, not many credit cards. So a lot of the population are not in the formal financial sector. And therefore, fintech startups have been able to come in and offer a leapfrog solution to large chunks of the population. SaaS, so enterprise SaaS is also something that receives a lot of attention as the companies in Southeast Asia are attempting to move to digital from traditional pen and paper recording and protocols, then SaaS becomes something that is interesting to them, that is suddenly considered vis-a-vis typical manual processes. So SaaS and fintech are kind of, I guess, at the top of the list. Entertainment is also something that has come of age, particularly because as in the aftermath of the pandemic, as people were staying at home and no new movies were being screened because the cinemas were shut, um, then streaming entertainment, whether it was audio, podcasts, or video, started to come into larger public consciousness. So those are kind of examples of the areas where we see a lot of new ideas, a lot of entrepreneurs coming forward, and a lot of investment being made available.
So are these startups primarily focusing on local markets, or they're targeting region, or they're going global? I mean,
I
what
think,
do you see the ambition of the founders mostly?
oh gosh, ambition is one of my favorite topics, Pavan. I think maybe if you asked me the question 5, 10 years ago, I would tell you that one of the heartbreaking things is that the ambition has been very local, very much, in fact, kind of their neighborhood, their district, their city. I think certainly in the last 2 or 3 years, we're seeing a more global ambition, a desire to solve problems that are shared across not just the Philippines, but the rest of Southeast Asia and overseas. The Philippines is about 10% of its population. Overseas, we've got this huge Philippine diaspora. And so the ability for even the direct to consumer solutions of necessity to tap this diaspora becomes a global solution. And I think that's something that's exciting, that we can see people with a more global mindset.
Let's move to the your investment thesis, right? I'm sure a lot of Philippine entrepreneurs, founders would be benefiting through your fund, but also you're investing not just in the region, even globally. So, what exactly are you looking for when you are choosing these investments? Are you looking at early stage, growth stage?
In terms of stage, we're looking at early growth. So our first fund, which is an evergreen fund, and we continue to invest, we write 100,000, $200,000 checks out of that, is really just about helping shepherd consumers and companies into more digital solutions. And that's something that is very much felt in the Philippines as an emerging market. And that's a regional fund. So we make investments just within Southeast Asia for that particular fund. Our newest fund, the active fund, is global. It invests Series A to C, with I think Series B kind of the core. So we're writing $2 to $10 million checks out of that third fund. And the thesis for that is quite different from our first fund. So for this fund, instead of saying we want to invest in fintech or we want to invest in SaaS, we're saying, what do we imagine the future will look like, and what kind of future do we want to back? So for the active fund, we have 4 theses about the future. The first one is a thesis we call the frictionless future. So, and I imagine, if you've come from the emerging market, there is friction in every single transaction that you want. And so frictionless future is about using data to make transactions better for the regular person on the street, but also for companies. So it's the future of data and how data can make transactions easier, smoother, more efficient, faster. Our second thesis after a frictionless future is what we call from automation to augmentation. So the Philippines, like many emerging markets, relies a lot on manual labor. And particularly we're a business process outsourcing hub. There's a lot of work that is sent over to us. And many people in the audience would have heard of how automation is going to destroy jobs. how factories will go dark, how robots will replace us. Um, that's kind of an automation mindset. It's a mindset that says we're going to replace human labor with robots or data. That's not what we want to invest in. What we want to do is move from an automation mindset to an augmentation mindset. How can we use data and technology and robotics to make human capital more valuable, to make human workers happier, more engaged, safer, to tap their intellect and their potential to make jobs better, to make outcomes better? So that can be looking at robotic process automation, but it can also be about technologies that make factories much more humane, and to recognize that the factory worker can be more productive if you gave them more data, if you gave them some support for the work that they do. So it's not about factories going dark, it's about workers becoming more engaged. The third one is called Smarter Living, which is a thesis around what are our communities going, the future of communities. What do the communities look like? What do our homes look like? So how do we live smarter, safer, happier, more collaborative? Um, and the last thesis, the fourth one, is a thesis we call A World of Plenty. And this is my favorite one. If you've grown up in, as a regular person in the emerging market, then scarcities are an acute thing you feel very deeply. It's the 21st century, but how many cities do not have potable water available to them? How many cities are still needing to be electrified, to be attached to a grid? So for us, A World of Plenty is a belief that the scarcities in this world are not because of a supply issue. The scarcities are caused by distribution issues. And this framing of scarcity is important because technology is a good solution frequently to distribution issues. So what we want to do is find solutions that bring abundance to populations in the 99% and not just for the 1% in the top tier cities in the world. So that's kind of what excites us, what animates our work today.
Great, interesting. I mean, you are covering a wide range. These are not just the sectors of business focus, but also about sustainability, the future, the community, the society at large. This is pretty interesting. So, continuing our conversation, uh, how do you find these startups? What exactly is the process you go through in identifying these startups? Do they reach out to you? Do you have some programs that they apply, or I mean, how exactly the founders, entrepreneurs, reach to you or to Kickstart if they want to explore any investment or some acceleration program opportunity with you?
It's a great question. We used to run an acceleration program. We've stopped. We've realized that's not our strength. And particularly in the Philippines, a lot of incubators and accelerators started to set up. And they do a much better job because that's the only thing they do. Typically, the way to reach us, um, you can do a cold email. Our website receives, I think, over 100 pitches should I say every month? Every month. And the ones that reach out to me, I've had people introduce themselves either through cold email or through LinkedIn. And I try to respond to everyone as soon as I can. I'm not terribly quick, but the most effective way to reach us, I've found though, is a warm introduction. So usually people will find a way to reach someone else whom we know, whether it's another founder, another investor, somebody from the corporate world. I think Ayala Corporation, which is our anchor LP for the third fund, they're very good at taking these and making the introductions, even if people have made a cold introduction of themselves to Ayala. usually for us, the warm introduction is the one that is easiest because it definitely won't land in spam or junk folder. And we kind of understand where they're coming from. But we're very we're very happy to make new friends, meet new people, and even if somebody has reached out to us and maybe they're raising, but it's not appropriate for our investment mandate, we're happy to make an introduction to another investor whom might be a better fit for them.
It's really great to see corporate venture capital coming out to support these startups. How do you see the angel investing in Philippines? Are there a lot of angel investors? Does rich and high upper middle class look at it as a asset class?
I think we have more angel investors, but not as many as we'd like. So when we started out in 2012, there were very few. There were probably less than half a dozen angel investors in the Philippines. And consequently, when we started out, we needed to, even as a corporate, begin to make investments that were angel in nature. Somebody with a PowerPoint, we'd write them a $30,000, $50,000 check, just to get people started. I think the good thing over the last 10 years or so is seeing more angel investors and also angel syndicates. So angel networks coming up. There's the Manila Angels Investment Network, for example, that's come up. And I think that's a good thing. It's great to see the early stages. And as that's happened, we sort of have moved our fund to write the larger checks that the angels cannot write. So what we're hoping to do is build almost like a relay race where people are able to hand the baton over to the next stage. And we're hoping that by writing bigger checks, the Philippines will now have kind of an unbroken line.
Yes.
From angel to all the way to Series C or D.
So, a minute, a bit about your own portfolio. How large is the portfolio? I mean, what has been the progress over the years? The portfolio. Somebody who made some big names.
Well, we've made investments in more than 50 startups by now. We've had a couple of exits. The most recent exit is, in fact, a Canadian company, Wattpad. And today is the 15th anniversary of Wattpad, which I saw the founder,
Yes, congratulations for that.
So this year, Naver, a large company out of South Korea, acquired Wattpad. And that's really good because that means that it meshes the content space that Naver is in, webtoons, together with all the amazing narratives that are being published on Wattpad. So that's, I guess, one of the names we've got. Out of your neck of the woods, we've made investments in companies like Skillshare for edutech, but also we've got on the other side of the United States, on the West Coast, we made our first U.S. investment is a company called Dialpad, with this just a great leadership
Absolutely,
team.
yeah.
Craig Walker, Vincent Paquet, and they had a very successful Series E race last year, which got them into valued at $1 billion versus where they were when we invested in them in 2015. There's also Lotus Flare, this wonderful B2B company out of San Francisco as well. So we've got a number of companies that are near neck of the woods, but we also have great companies that out of Israel and out of Southeast Asia. So
Great.
there's a lot of exciting ones.
Yeah, I think we had a great conversation, Minette. But there are a lot of younger people who are aspiring for who have the ambition to become entrepreneurs, do something on their own. So what's your advice for them in general? But I also see that you have a very strong women's team, and I think I would even urge you to focus a bit on women entrepreneurs. How do you want to encourage them, and what's your words of wisdom for them to, to feel at a later part in the life that hey, I should have tried this earlier, right?
No, that's a good question. I think many founders, many entrepreneurs, especially the first time ones, they think that the most important thing is the idea. I think from an investor standpoint, the most important thing is the person. We look at the founder, we look at the founding team, we look at their ability to see the big picture, but then focus on the task at hand. So the founders are the single most important thing for an investor. The other thing I think for ourselves is we look at execution. And execution doesn't need to mean it was perfect from day one. Execution also means the ability to bounce back, to pivot from adversity. So last year, the onset of the pandemic was such a showcase for how people could demonstrate grit. And in fact, one exit we had was from a company who was in brick and mortar retail loyalty, and yet they made us a good return. They made a good return for themselves, good exit. So frequently it's less the idea, it's the founders, it's the execution, it's meeting up to overcome adversity. I think those things. And yes, Pavan, women, a diverse team is always good. Doesn't have to be all one or the other. Diversity can mean many things, but we like seeing teams that have multiple talents and multiple approaches to solving a problem in the world.
What's your advice for all those younger people, who are stuck in the corporate world but still want to jump into the entrepreneurship, right? There's always a predicament like, when do I do it? How do I do it? You know, I do it this part time but not full time. So what's your take on that, and what's your advice for those younger children?
That's a tough question because everybody's personal financial circumstances are different. I do think it helps. If you're in the corporate world and you've never been in a startup, I think one tip I've learned that works well is to find a startup that has been funded, so that you can leave the corporate world but have some of the a little bit of a safety net. There's no guarantee, it's a startup, but if a startup has been funded, not only it's not about the fact that it's got the cash, but it is about the fact that a lot of people have probably done diligence on this company. And so if you can trust the diligence of the investors, then you have a little bit more assurance that the company you're joining has some stability and the ability to scale.
It's a great conversation. Just to sum it up, I mean, your journey with a strong educational background into the corporate world, then into entrepreneurship, then leading a fund as a president, and helping a lot of budding entrepreneurs, not just in Philippines, in Southeast Asia and globally, to realize their dreams and uh, you know, put their passion to work. It's so interesting, and it's really great. And continue to. It's not about doing a job. It's more about creating value for the community and society. And you're doing a great job in that direction, and great contribution from you. Thank you so much.
Gosh, it's a great summary, Pavan. Thank you very much.